a graduate of Syracuse, and so Syracuse, they graduate all the great media people of the world now. I mean, that's a great school for it. I'm not kidding. John has been with a lot of different people. He was at 247 when we had the Oklahoma State site over there, and then when Scott Kennedy told me that John was coming over to head up the recruiting with the new Sports Illustrated network, we had moved over, and I said, "That's good. That's good because I think." From what I've read of John and what I know of him, because we'd never met, I said, I think I agree with a lot of the things. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with John and a lot of the folks with the sites at Sports Illustrated, and I agreed with everything he threw up on graphics and everything. Don't spoil the kid's moment. All the different avenues you should take. Be aggressive, but be smart. And also the one that's crystal for me is our job isn't to recruit. I mean, I can name names, and in this state, you can damn sure name names of people that are in this business that cross the line. They're not covering recruiting; they're actually recruiting. Um, so again, I thought it was a great deal yesterday that we were on. John joins us now, and John, good morning.
Hey, Robert, good to be on with you. Appreciate the kind words.
Good to have you on. And the one thing when Scott Kennedy told me you were coming on board, we just moved our site. I mean, yeah, I moved the people that work with me. We just moved from one network to the other. You were establishing and starting from scratch with SI All American and having the football recruiting end of it. That's a little more daunting than just moving your site over. That's starting something new. So how was that for you?
Yeah, it's been pretty great. Definitely a challenge, and that's really what I wanted. I think in this business, there's everyone sort of has a lane, and you know this, Robert. Everyone has a lane, and when you decide to push beyond it, yeah, there's a lot of unknown and uncharted water in that direction. But that's something that I wanted to see if I could rise to the occasion with, and luckily for me, I knew sites like yours and so many other good ones were already migrated over there, so I knew that it would be quite familiar, even though for me specifically, the role would be something new. So it was kind of a 50-50 challenge where it didn't feel like it was truly starting from scratch because of that familiarity. So I was excited about it, and that group, like you said, Scott Kennedy, yourself, folks like that. I just knew that there was a strong chance for success right out of the gate, and I think that's what has been achieved across the board. And we know that there's a lot more on the way, which is also exciting. So to be any part of the SI brand is a really big deal in this business, as you know. So we're happy to push it forward.
Well, and again, one of the things that the problem I've always had when you cover a school like Oklahoma State, you want everything to kind of be fair. And let's look at it this way: Mike Gundy and his staff, they've done a better job. I love the hiring of Todd Bradford, who's his now his recruiting guy that's a longtime assistant coach that I think they're doing a better job of recruiting some more higher end guys. But where Oklahoma State's excelled is evaluating and finding the guys that aren't higher end guys as far as rankings, but they probably should be. And that's kind of, just yesterday, another site, another network bumped up, a couple of Oklahoma State's recruits with stars. You've got a system, and I don't know how much you want to give to the fans that are listening right now, but you guys with SI All American are about to reveal a system of evaluating players and kind of grading them to a degree or ranking them. I don't like that word ranking. There's no way that somebody can rank every quarterback in high school and junior college in America. College
Right.
coaches who do it all the time can't do that accurately. But I kind of liked what you were saying yesterday. Kind of putting them in groups, using words maybe instead of numbers and stars, but having kind of a blank canvas to create a system to me, that was not only the biggest challenge, but may be the most fun. You may change ranking of football recruits forever and ever if you come up with a system that is a little more accurate and a little more fair. Fair is the best word, uh, because this is
Yeah.
it's an extremely daunting task and hard to do. It's an impossible task. But if you can come up
Yeah,
with something more credible.
we're trying, and that's why that there's a very strategic element of this. Like you said, we're not quite ready to reveal everything just yet. We want to make sure that it's as thorough and as transparent as can be, and I think that's the name of the game. It's transparency, whether you're ranking or rating or whatever. How do you come to that? What is the goal of that? And I think being transparent is not the most consistent element in our industry, and it needs to be because, first of all, you're dealing with minors, right? You're dealing with kids more times than not. So I think that element of it needs to push a little bit further away from the numerical essence of a ranking and a rating in such a data driven industry that recruiting has become because of the NFL combine, because of the testing, the athletic testing that is available now nationwide. So we want to push a little bit away from that. Not to say it doesn't matter, because that data is important to a degree, but placing those types of rankings on prospects verbatim based off of that data primarily is not the right way to go. There's so much unknown. There's so many intangibles in the game of football that makes it so great. That's why it's the ultimate team game. So we want to emphasize those types of things and normalize that element, the human element of football. So we're working towards something like that. And like you said, we do have a big plan. It's an ambitious plan. It's a daunting plan to a degree, but we're in the middle of it. We're really excited about it, and hopefully before kickoff, God willing, all of that will be very public and very clear, and it'll be a very different voice in the recruiting industry, which it should be, right? This is Sports Illustrated. It should be a different voice. It should be a thorough, transparent voice, and that's what we're aiming for.
Again, John Garcia Jr. with us. He's kind of the guiding light right now for SI All American, which is the recruiting headquarters on the Sports Illustrated Maven network. And along those lines, you know this. I mean, I've covered recruiting for 30 years. I'm so old that I did a series on television living with Mike Gundy and his family for several days when he was a recruit coming out of Midwest City High School. So I've seen a lot of this, but um, let's talk about what we're in right now with the pandemic. And along those lines, the NCAA may have lifted the ban on campus training, but they extended the ban on off campus and on campus recruiting through the end of June. Talking to some head coaches in the Big 12, they think we're going to go a complete summer where there won't be any on campus camps or on campus official or unofficial visits. I know this. We did a series on the digital graphics operator at Oklahoma State who since has been hired away by A&M. You've seen this with a ton of schools, John, and the imagination. I give points to college football recruiters, coaches, the people that are behind the scenes. Their imaginations have served them well during the pandemic.
Yeah, hey, Nick Saban got an email address during all of this. I think if that can happen, then anything is possible. In the words of Kevin Garnett, look, everybody has been pushed in different directions because of this, and in the college football recruiting game, it's no different. I think creativity and consistency have really been what has won out for the coaching staffs that seem to be doing the best on the recruiting trail right now. But what I love about this, to find some silver lining, is that the schools that are going to come out of this better than the others are the ones who are old school, who are more in that classic evaluator mode, focusing on Friday night video with these high school prospects, as opposed to some of the camps and off-season stuff and data-driven information and data points that have become such a part of the process, and frankly, a confusing part of the process for a lot of people involved. So, the classic evaluators at those programs that have succeeded and have stability at the top, like in Oklahoma State, I think of Iowa, I think of programs like Wisconsin, who should be able to benefit through this because the schools that recruit their kind of guys, their type of fits, are the ones that can win out because anybody can go out and throw some graphics at a top prospect and hope for the best and try to establish that communication. But those we know who's going to win those battles, right? So it's about that next tier of prospect and how to properly identify and recruit that group, and those are the types of programs that I think will prevail when all this is over, and really because a lot of the top programs and the top recruits out there, we know there's going to be a lot of movement, right, Robert? This is going to be the biggest decommitment season maybe we've ever seen because there's so many kids who have accelerated the process and sort of bought into a little bit of this sort of complacency that this quarantine has created. I think there's twice as many verbal commitments at this point this year compared to this point last year. So just think of that. And we always see a lot of decommitments during the season, but that's without, sacrificing visits and camps and things like that. So now there's sort of this less tangible information on each kid, yet more kids are making decisions. So once kids are able to take visits like that and get into the fall and get on campus, it's going to be sort of the wild, wild west. So those programs that can identify their kind of guys that might not be the most coveted nationally, just the better fits for their program, those are the programs that are going to win out. And I think Oklahoma State has a chance to be in that group.
Yeah, and some of the guys they picked up lately, the Colin Oliver comes from a pipeline school. He's a lot like Trace Ford, the freshman they got from Santa Fe that played well last year, and they kind of know what they're getting. Along the lines of what you were saying, and that this was my next question. You kind of fed into it perfectly. You and I are, and then the people that are in our business, we're in touch with a lot of kids. And when this pandemic first started, and I started making rounds of calls to recruits and seeing what they were doing now that they didn't have school and that they were at home doing home learning and virtual learning, how they were working out, with not being at school, not being in the school weight room, and then how they were handling recruiting. And I mean, Danny Stutzman, the Florida linebacker that ended up committing to Oklahoma. Yeah, I remember him and a couple of other guys. Well, I'm going to wait. I'm being patient. I'm going to take visits, and however, I'll wait until this pandemic's over, so I can go
Right.
on campus and make official visits. Now, and you mentioned we've seen more commitments. It's almost like they've happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks. It's almost like kids started out with the goal of being patient, and then all of a sudden they hit a point in the pandemic or a point in the quarantining, and it was like, I'm not patient anymore. I'm going to make a decision. And is
Mm.
that the way you read this?
Yeah, it's the sort of good and bad of recruiting nowadays is all of these kids. It's not hard to find out the information on which team has which kid on board right now, right? So as a prospect, hey, I've got 5 Power 5 offers. 4 of these schools are up over, let's say, a dozen commitments. So about half the class is already on board at 4 of the schools that I'm looking at. So one, it makes me say, well, what's going on with that 5th school? What are they doing differently? And two, it makes me say, well, of the 4 schools that are sort of filling up, do I need to think about pushing my decision forward if I need to get a spot at one of these 4? Basically, how much do I like that 5th school that's not sort of following the trend? Those are decisions you got to make. So if 80% of the schools you're looking at are moving in a certain direction, you're probably going to buy into it, especially when it's so public to see, okay, that I'm a safety. They have a safety already committed. If I want to jump on this school, I need to do it now. So that there's a created urgency because of the rush of commitments. Like you said, it's like they've all come in the last couple of weeks. And I think the biggest reason for that is because most of these kids want to be decided and committed, if they can, before their senior season begins. And it was like they were holding out hope that we would get this green light and they would be able to hit some camps and hit some visits and things like that. And then in the last couple of weeks, it's become pretty clear that, like you said earlier, pretty much the entire off season is a wash in recruiting in terms of physical recruiting, visits, camps, evaluations, things like that. So you sort of, whatever you have right now, whatever you have collected today in terms of offers and options, that's what you got. You know, the idea of adding offers and all of that probably isn't going to come as easily as it has in any year prior. It's going to have to come on Friday nights, but some prospects aren't willing to wait that long. The classic notion of committing before your senior year so you could focus on the field for your senior year is still prevalent with prospects today. It's just that everything in between and building up and leading up to that senior year is flipped upside on its head. So it's created this urgency because so much of that information is very public. You know, Tennessee's gotten like 15 kids in the last 3 weeks, and it's mostly because they're consistent, but it's also because they're filling up. And prospects who are on the bubble with Tennessee are sort of checking in and saying, "Hey, do I still have a spot? Oh yeah, you do. You might want to think about coming." And most of them have. So it's so public right now that it's easy to create urgency without truly pushing or pressuring prospects, which we also know happens pretty consistently in addition to that. So it's kind of a crazy cycle, but like you said, it's been a clear shift in the last 2-3 weeks with kids pushing up commitment dates, and I don't want to say rushing into decisions, but certainly doing them sooner than they had planned and sooner than we had expected.
Yeah, you read my mind because I told one of the things I in the first segment of the show today. I didn't go into great detail, but I kind of told the audience a little bit about the meeting that was held with all the publishers and with you yesterday on for the Sports Illustrated All American uh, site and mentioned you were coming on today. You mentioned Tennessee, and you mentioned this may be a big year for second thoughts and changes. Decommitments is that's the word we use in this business. And when you look at Tennessee with 22 right now, I think that may be what their total number is. In the Big 12, I think Texas is pushing a big number. Maybe who was it? Baylor. Baylor, surprisingly, with Dave Aranda
Yep.
and in his first year, and they're pushing a big number right now. Is this a year where if you go into the fall and there is a lot of movement among prospects as far as second thoughts, this may not be the year you want to have a huge number and be stuck there because there may be some guys come available that you may get on a rebound, but they're guys you really would like to have. I mean, that's kind of my question. Is a lot of commitments right now too many in a way for some schools because you might miss out on some second opportunities.
I completely could see that. And I personally know some programs who have wanted to stay low because of that fact, because of the fact that there hasn't been this tangible off season, because of the fact that we really don't know what these kids have looked like in the last 6 months. Think about that. We have no video of any top prospects since their season. So if you didn't go to the state championship, you're talking November. I mean, we're in May. Like that's in a teenager's life, in a growing teenager's life, that's a huge gap in time. So I do know several coaching staffs that are strategically playing it slower because of that fact. There's too much unknown at this point. Now, have they reversed course at least a little bit and said, okay, we do need to grab a few here and there? Yes, but not to the point of some programs. So you can make the argument on either side of this because if you're Tennessee, it's like, well, yeah, we've got a great recruiting class, but we want these kids on board before we hit the field on Saturday because nobody's predicting Tennessee to win the SEC East or compete in the SEC. So this is a whole different ballgame. That's why I was saying earlier, the schools that find the guys who fit what they do have those same expectations. A Wisconsin commit is not going to turn his head at an 8-5 kind of season. That's okay for Wisconsin, and those kids have already bought into that sort of consistency. So the programs that are on an upward trajectory with newer coaching staffs, you're talking Tennessee, North Carolina. You mentioned Baylor, right?
Yeah.
A lot of their movement is going to happen during the season because there's going to be some L's during the season. And really, the elite programs and the stable, cultured programs are the ones best equipped to combat that, not necessarily the ones with newer coaching staffs who seemingly are on the up and up. You still got to do it on Saturdays in recruiting. You know, winning used to be the number one criteria for recruiting. It's probably shifted to the NFL and the potential to play pro, but winning is still pretty high up there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like you said, there is a true double-edged sword here with prospects who have committed early, and from the school's perspective on how to handle that. And it's going to be fascinating to see. And it's another reason why we're expecting so much movement.
Yeah. I got into this a long time ago and started covering recruiting as a local TV sportscaster because I like the psychology of it. I like the human interest aspect of it, and we're going to see a lot of that with the COVID-19 pandemic and all of this. Hey, John, we kept you a little bit. I appreciate it, and again, look forward to working with you. Look forward to kind of restarting and redoing how recruiting's looked at and covered. Because I think in some ways we got off the beaten path a little bit in some areas, and we got a chance to reset the compass with the SI All American. So if you need anything in this neck of the woods, let me know, and I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, absolutely, Robert. Your phone's going to be buzzing once we get the all clear here. So I'm excited for it. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. John Garcia Jr., SI All American, and again the recruiting phase